Dopamine used to be the brain's reward chemical. Now, it's a reason you can't focus, can't sleep, and can't put your phone down. And apparently, the fix is a dopamine reset, a growing movement that convinces people that giving up everything that feels good to feel good again. Dr. Owen, have we actually figured out how our brains work, or have we just found another new thing to blame?
Hello, Sam. Let's be blunt. The brain is widely regarded as the most complex object in the known universe. And in the human case, it also gives rise to two utterly incomprehensible entities, the mind and consciousness. So as of right now, 2026, we've barely scratched the surface on understanding how the brain works and how we might therefore successfully reprogram it at our own will. As for a dopamine reset specifically, it's an online meme that's not consistent with anything that neurologists or neuroscientists understand or have researched. Why do I say that? Because, well, dopamine is just one of a bunch of chemicals, along with, for example, serotonin and noradrenaline that transmit information from one neuron to the next. And it's constantly, therefore, being made and broken down all the time to transmit these signals. Doesn't accumulate in a way that would make a detox or reset sort of accurate terminology. It's not like cleansing the body of a buildup of mercury if you've eaten too much tuna or something like that, or of uric acid if you've had too many shellfish or something. I don't know. It's something we can't really let out. And what tends to matter is essentially how under or overactive a particular pathway in the brain is, rather than the overall content. So there are lots of different pathways for which dopamine has different roles in different parts of the brain. In psychiatry, we know that too much dopamine in certain pathways drives the hallucinations and delusions that are seen in schizophrenia. Basically, all the antipsychotic medications that we understand how they work by reducing dopamine in these pathways. On the flip side, we have Parkinson's disease, where in the substantia nigra, or a region of the brain that was named because it's got a couple of dark spots, we get a underproduction of dopamine, and that causes the body to stiffen up, and that characteristic tremor that comes with Parkinson's disease. And we also know that too little dopamine elsewhere in the brain can reduce our focus. So what we're doing, we're not really trying to do a dopamine detox, not how the scientists would understand it. And therefore, when you go on PubMed or Google Scholar, unfortunately, there's basically no science looking directly at this. So when we get into trying to sort of put some meat on the bones of this discussion in terms of scientific evidence, we'll find that we really are clutching at straws to try and back it up. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. It's just not something that's been scientifically validated. And as we were speaking about before we got on, just sometimes the science doesn't match the sort of social trends. Perhaps sometimes there's a lag because the experiments take longer to get funded, approved, ethical approval, and get done than there is online attention to a particular thing.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like there's a lot of these like types of things possibly are also being researched behind closed doors. You would have thought, like how the likes of Facebook and Google will employ like fields of like psychologists to be able to make their software as addictive as possible, or like I'm talking about retention really here as opposed to addiction. But I suppose maybe it's a little bit like as well, like the cigarette companies in the 70s would have their own scientists who are checking the facts behind closed doors, but not sharing information beyond that. Because I would be shocked to know if they haven't been looking at dopamine at a very detailed level within some of these huge companies, but just not releasing that information, using it to their own benefit, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is called publication bias. And if your study is funded by, a body that's there to promote science and interesting findings, the publication bias usually skews towards they don't publish things that are uninteresting. Whereas if your funding organization or the research team behind a study, inadvertently proves something that if it were to get out would be detrimental to the people funding the studies, wants and whims and desires, then they're not under an obligation to publish it. So they don't, and you get this publication bias of burying the stuff that doesn't look good, unfortunately. But in today's conversation, I think what would be really helpful is if we sort of reframe away from calling things a dopamine reset or detox, because dopamine actually isn't really a reward chemical like you were suggesting. It's more of a anticipation thing often. Um, and instead move towards a terminology that might be like digital detox or high frequency variable reward stimuli, and thinking about how we might go for behavioral change or stimulus control. So, high frequency variable reward stimuli was kind of pioneered in Vegas and Reno, Nevada, when the slot machines were being developed. And they discovered that humans are really intoxicated by uncertainty, unpredictability, and the chance of something massively exceeding their expectations. And then, yeah, the social media tech titans have just hijacked that same neurobiological pathway that makes us excited about things potentially going really well and makes us very interested in uncertainty and unpredictability. So, yeah, if we start talking about behavioral change and stimulus control to reduce our exposure to high frequency variable reward stimuli, then we might find that actually there are some real and positive impacts to be had, even if there's basically no studies looking directly at the sort of dopamine detox hypothesis or meme. So, anyway, before we get into it, what are your thoughts, Sam? Have you tried to do a dopamine detox or reset or any such thing?
Yeah. Yeah, mate. So interesting what you say about the unpredictable variable reward generation or something like that. I can say digital detox because, that's all my brain can handle. Clearly because overstimulated by Instagram, or at least it was. Yeah, I deleted Instagram back in December. It's now what we on. We're almost in April now, so almost 4 months later. Honestly, felt like pretty great at not having it. But I would say that it's interesting because like my kind of like reflexive actions in the first few days as I was kind of coming off, going into that digital detox, so to speak, as my only social media outlet would be I would like reflexively go to the app. I never deleted the app, but I just logged out and I'd like go to it, click on it, and I see login page, and I'd be like, oh, why am I didn't even think to do it. I just like reflexively would do it. So I don't know if my brain was seeking out like a quick hit of something of dopamine or whatever, like kind of excitement it was looking for. Then of course, I discovered that Reddit is, I already had Reddit, but I must say I kind of started substituting that for Instagram instead, which has been positive, broadly speaking, because it's definitely an improvement between the two of these platforms. It's not just pure slop, but yeah, I do feel better for it. I don't know whether that's just me convincing myself because I've made a positive change, but yeah, I definitely don't get sucked into the same nonsense I used to on Instagram. But maybe I just upgraded or downgraded my source of dopamine. Anywho, what are your thoughts, eh?
I think that's an interesting one, and that's a pretty good analogy to uh, sort of crack open what might be at play here. I think that yeah, a lot of people chide themselves, beat themselves up for falling back into habits of scrolling things online and finding a new vice to replace the old vice. And I think that a bit of sort of historical context of 100 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, people were obsessed with books. They loved reading, those that had access to books, because they loved the uncertainty, the unpredictability, the sort of page turning, engrossing effect of a good story. But this was not particularly engaging in terms of um, grabbing our attention, variable stimulus, and potential to have our expectations massively exceeded. And so when the radio came along, the books became a bit bland and boring, and people got really engrossed in radio. And then the same thing happened with television. And then the internet's just blown that out the water. And a lot of us beat ourselves up because we can't sit down with a good book and enjoy it. Because what we're used to, the forms of stimulation are so much richer, more varied, more unpredictable, and loaded up with more potential upside a lot faster. and easier. And then we beat ourselves up succumbing to this. But it's just when we think about like what's going on there, it's just not really surprising at all that, yeah, if we're sort of evolved to abhor a static picture and be on the lookout and vigilant for change in the case that it's potentially bad or dangerous or threatening change, and to be massively pleased when it turns out not to be. Well, it's no surprise that we find the internet quite compelling. And yeah, if you fall into that bracket of people who find the internet to be compelling and the randomness and unpredictability of it enticing, well, that is what it is to be human. And unfortunately, we've got wealthy people who have found a way to monetize our humanity. Yeah, our ancestors who were happy studying these unchanging pictures or would still be on books now, they missed the saber-toothed tiger stalking towards them. They're not here. So, well, they're not our ancestors, obviously, are they? Our ancestors are the ones that noticed the tiger and were on the lookout for change. So, yeah, that's why I'd say, like, okay, you might beat yourself up for it, but like, just as we have quite a large rotund population of humans nowadays. Lots of people are overweight or obese. A lot of that is because we live in a really obesogenic environment where there are lots and lots of factors at play that create a mismatch in terms of our wiring and the world that we inhabit that mean that it's very easy to overindulge. And we've got all these pleasure sensors that light up, and we manage to put in new novel foods and get loads of calories on board and sugary things and hot fatty things and French fries and all that. Like, it's really exciting for us on a neurochemical level. I think the same is true with we live in a online landscape where things are moving so much and things are changing so fast that it's really exciting for us, and things are lighting up on a neurochemical level. And so when we try and take that all away, it feels bad.
I am trying to reduce the levels of those chemicals. I remember hearing on a podcast, I think it was, someone talking about how they just turned their phone to grayscale. And I was thinking earlier about your analogy with the slot machines. I see, well, one of the things that's like crazy, if you ever walk a floor if you even just go into a casino and you see everything, it's like lights everywhere. There's like these bright colored fruits, which is what you're trying to like, you pull the, what's it called? There's a phrase for it, pull the thing, pull the lever, and then you get these like bright colored fruits, and you get this like crazy rewards, noises as well. But then when I heard that about the grayscale on, say, Instagram, for example, I thought actually that makes a lot of sense. And then the way he described it, our podcast was like swapping candy for like something that's just a bit meh, which made sense to me. So maybe there is something in that as well. Does that make sense? From like in terms of reducing the stimuli that you're receiving as a way of like, or would that like make a difference?
Yeah, I think you're onto some interesting insight there, which is that perhaps people whose interests aren't aligned with their own have successfully hijacked circuits that already exist to reward good behaviors and replace them with bad ones. Uh, for example, we know that we have cannabinoid receptors all throughout the brain, and that we do produce in small doses chemicals that are very similar to THC and CBD. And then weed kind of hijacks that, and for some people feels really blooming good because it binds to these receptors in the brain and lights things up a lot more intensively. And then we know that you can push that even further, and you can make synthetic analogs of weed that basically bind them irreversibly, and that can make people feel real blissed out and real good, but it could also stop them breathing and people die. We also know that the reason why opiates are so effective in pain relief, so think OxyContin and all that, is because we have receptors for them to bind to, because we already produce similar compounds and chemicals that act within the body. And that's why sucking your thumb, if you've like got a splinter or if you've cut your thumb or whatever, feels so good for the pain, because we have chemical cousins or siblings of opiates in our saliva. But then we've gone out and we've found stronger ones in nature. So, we diamorphine coming from the poppy plant, and then we've gone and synthetically designed even stronger ones, so like fentanyl and things like that. So we have these circuits that were designed for a reason, and we can hijack them with technology. And so I think that's essentially what's happening here, but not with a substance, with a set of behaviors or stimuli that drive behaviors.
So much to unpick from that, man. Um, Firstly, digital weed. That's crazy. Secondly, like it makes sense. Or, but also basically what you're saying is all of these various like chemicals do exist in our brains themselves, but just at much lower, well, not all of them obviously, but a lot of them do exist in our brains, but at a much lower level. So, and people are being able to hijack that by creating artificially high levels of, well, not artificially, but literally high levels in some cases with real drugs, levels of these chemicals in our brains.
Yeah, or I think even maybe a better way of conceptualizing it would be the lock and key, and people have managed to artificially make keys that fit the lock even better than the original key for which it was designed, and that won't come back out the lock, and therein lies the
Wow.
problem.
And won't come out the lock. That's crazy what you said about the digital weed as well. So I'm circling in on that one, but crazy that it does that, but then also can kill people. That it's absolutely, I'm surprised I've never heard of that before. Maybe one for another time. Okay. So,
So I think that does lead us into talking about the biology and the psychology of what's going on here. And unfortunately, like I've said, dopamine detoxes or digital behavior and online scrolling and its effect on dopamine production in the brain, like essentially hasn't been studied. And like I said, what we do know is that different regions of the brain and different pathways utilize dopamine differently. We've got different types of dopamine receptors on different neurons or nerve cells. And we know that, like I was saying with schizophrenia, too much dopamine in the prefrontal cortex drives psychosis. Hence, antipsychotic drugs work by reducing dopamine activation. Too little around another part of the brain that we've mentioned already causes Parkinson's disease. And too little in the striatum tends to correlate with worse sustained attention. So I couldn't find, like I said, any good data on what we came here to talk about today, unfortunately. But I did find an interesting small 2025 study of testing the sort of dopamine hit hypothesis on drinking a fatty, sugary milkshake. And basically, the researchers of this 2025 paper took 50 adults and gave them a fatty, sugary milkshake and monitored using PET scanning, which is a fancy CT scan, to see if the striatum in the brain lit up with extra dopamine production after the milkshake. And the thought was that this is what tends to happen as a consequence to a lot of recreational drug use. So we've got reliable repeated studies that show that using amphetamines cause a surge in dopamine in the striatum. And so does nicotine, and so does alcohol. And then to a lesser extent, so does THC, which is the more active, interesting component of weed, and diamorphine, which we mentioned earlier. And they actually found that, though it's the only study of its kind, the fatty, sugary milkshake did not induce a spike in dopamine. So this doesn't really tell us anything about a dopamine detox or a digital detox, except that extrapolating across from what makes addictive substances addictive to what makes compulsive behaviors compulsive is perhaps fraught and might not necessarily tell us all we need to know. So, if we were to go after the digital detox data instead, what we find again is that it's not studied on a neurochemical level, but it is studied in terms of what the effects of digital detox can be in terms of depressive symptoms. And there's a 2024 meta-analysis and systematic review that I found that basically broader mental well-being doesn't necessarily get better, but depressive symptoms specifically tend to. So it might be that there's something going on that does have to do with dopamine. It might be one of those other neurotransmission chemicals that we spoke about, like serotonin, or it might just be something as simple and straightforward as reducing our repeated exposures to things that make us sad or apathetic or otherwise triggered makes our lives better.
good point. I was just thinking about that whole thing about like what was that phrase from the Meditations for Mortals? Don't compare your insides with other people's outsides. And so I guess yeah, I think a big part of why social media makes at least a lot of people sad is comparing their lives to other people. So yeah, being able to actually kind of isolate that feeling from the actual science, if you talk about depressive symptoms, it's hard. Like the neurochemicals versus just like how we're feeling. Okay, Owen, I think I'm getting a vibe here. Tell me, what is a digital detox, or dopamine detox even? What's the verdict on this?
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess disappointing if you came here looking for a kind of neuroscientific basis that was concrete and built around your ideas that a digital detox would be good for you. And unfortunately, the dopamine detox is really thought of as basically a gibberish term, but attempting lifestyle changes that are designed to make your life better, even if it's around the shaky, shifting sands of the idea that actually what you need to do is reduce dopamine in some part of the brain, might actually be a good thing. And actually challenging behavioral patterns and reprogramming reward pathways to align with good habits rather than bad ones is a good thing, even if it's wrapped up in an unverified, unsubstantiated meme.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, we're saying snake oil, in terms of like the actual uh, science behind it. But it can of course be very beneficial to do some form of dopamine or even digital detox for one's sanity. Maybe not their neurochemicals. Cool. All right. Or maybe it is for neurochemicals, we just don't know. It's probably the important thing to draw a line under there. Okay. So, is there anything I can do to help me or our dear viewers can do to help with their own dopamine levels? Or, yeah, what do you think?
Well, no, like I think as we've gone over, like the dopamine levels themselves are like it's an untested theory that we just don't have any data to support that actually time spent online is correlating with a net increase or decrease or sensitization or desensitization. It's just not been studied, or if it has been studied, it's just not been published. But yeah, if you are interested in improving your life, or if you're interested in becoming interested in slower paced stimuli, well, essentially you do need to recalibrate yourself and normalize yourself to those stimuli. And it's going to start off boring, basically. But if you are calibrated to a level of sort of attention and rapid task switching and intense overt stimuli, then you're just going to find things that lack that to be boring. Yeah. We don't fully, I guess, understand the neurochemistry of what that is. And this is what it is, which is yeah, untested hypothesis at the moment. However, if you want to take this opportunity as the opportunity to review, refine your online activities and make them more intentional and better aligned with your values and purpose, like just great, go ahead and do it. And don't wait for the neuroscientist cavalry that may or may not be coming to provide a concrete chemical mechanism for you to back up making the change.
I like that. Yeah. Um, just to go revisit mine and my partner's quitting of Instagram, like honestly, it felt really good doing it. If not just for having more time in our days, like none of that was scientifically backed, but I can tell you for real that yeah, suddenly had an extra hour in my day every day. So yeah, even if the science doesn't back it up, maybe this can be that signal or that sign for you to give it a go. Yeah, nice. Okay, close it there then.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And hopefully see you next time.
Take it easy.